BBC, inspiring Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. As the global chessboard begins to take precedent now, as Africa is the centerpiece there, we look at the Russia-African Summit and wonder what exactly is happening there. Who is going to be influencing the politics, the economy, and the societies in Africa? But as Uganda, what do we stand to benefit from such a summit? It was there all last week, and President Putin came up with 3 things that he would like to see in Africa. 1 is the security, 2 is the trade, and finally the science and technology. Which opportunities can Uganda seize, but also the engagements that were there? What most can we achieve? I have a panel of experts that are going to put perspective to this, especially in the sense of trade, investment, the economy, but also can it trickle down and translate into the pockets of you and I? That's the biggest question tonight on Behind the Headlines. Let's meet the panel.
Re-examining the outcome. On set with him is an illustrious panel. Uganda accountant and business administrator. She was also a Deputy Managing Director at the National Social Security Fund and now Uganda's Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives, Madam Sally Geraldine. Our own, the Dean of the School of Gender and Women's Studies at Makerere University, Professor Sally Sarah. A doctor and now politician, he is the Minister of ICT, the Honorable Chris Baryomonsi. The Bardeg People's Representative in Parliament, Honorable Martin Ojara Mapenduzi. An economist, banker, and now he speaks the voices of the people of Otuke County, Honorable Omara Paul. Behind the Headlines.
So yeah, that's the panel that you're meeting tonight, and we'll be discussing everything Russia, but also the opportunities and engagements that are there. Some of the bits of news that came in that were interesting, especially when you look at the Western news. NBC came out to say Putin is searching for friends, but also the Times magazine came out and said why African leaders are shunning Putin's summit. Was that the truth? Because the perspective there was 17 leaders showed up. The last one in 2019, 43 leaders showed up. But 32 countries had representatives there. In total, we had 49 statesmen that represented Africa there. But sanctions were threatened to be slapped onto African countries. Was that a deterrent for some of them? Let me turn to my guests who are here with me. And ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome. It's good to have you all, including the birthday boy, Honorable Mara. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
It's good to have you today.
Thank you, Timothy and the viewers. We need to cut a cake here.
So you can join us on YouTube or go to our Twitter handle, hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines. Let us know what you think. The number for you to text or WhatsApp is 0709 90 62 25. Let us know what you think. I think the guests that I'm hosting for the first time are both the Honorable Minister and Madam Permanent Secretary. Thank you both for coming and honoring us with our invite here. I'll start with the Minister.
You're partly right, but I had been here before.
I was hosting you?
Okay, the show is not my first time.
Yes.
You are the host the first time. That's what I'm saying. You are partially right.
Okay.
Yes.
Honorable Minister, let's get into it. First and foremost, the Russia-Ukraine war is still ongoing. 10 days ago, the Black Sea agreement that was between Ukraine and Russia for the grain really came to a standstill there. Promises made by President Putin, threats made by the US to African countries. Why did our president go, and what does this mean for us?
Well, first of all, there are many summits which take place with the African leaders. Russia is one of them, Russia-Africa, and this was the second one.
Yes.
The first one having taken place in 2019. We have also seen China, Africa. We have seen TICAD where Japan also hosts. So it is not special that the African leaders were meeting with Russia. And it shouldn't be understood that this summit was organized because there has been a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I think it's just a coincidence. Now, second, I think African leaders attended. While the heads of state, yes, could have been fewer, but there were delegations from different countries. And if a president delegates a vice president or a prime minister or a minister of foreign affairs, that government has attended. I think, as far as my record is concerned, there are, I think, 3 countries which probably never attended. One was Nigeria, because I think internally there was a problem with the threat of a coup. Then Kenya, the president, I think, delegated AU, and Sahrawi, which Sahrawi has no diplomatic relationship with Russia. But otherwise, the rest of the countries attended, either led by the president or head of state themselves, or senior government leaders. So I would say Africa shunned the summit. Why did we attend? This also is related to the vote that we took in the UN. There is a diplomat who came to my office to ask me, why did Uganda vote the way it voted? Because Uganda abstained. And I told the diplomat that I thought each country was voting depending on its own interests, not to please any world power. And despite the situation Russia finds itself in, we maintain cordial bilateral relationships between Uganda and Russia. And our view as a government, as a country, has been that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine should be resolved through round-table discussions and reconciliation. And that's why Uganda has been part of the team of the African leaders that have traveled to Russia and Ukraine, try to intervene so that the guns can get silent and the situation can return to normalcy. So we took a position as government not to please anybody, whether you are a superpower or not, but we thought the conflict should not necessarily injure our relations with Russia. So that's why our president went to Russia to join his colleagues to participate in this summit. And to us, I think the summit was successful because a lot of key issues were discussed. Our interest as a government is to see that we address issues of trade. You have heard the president speak passionately on the need to promote trade and business, not necessarily getting aid from these countries. And his emphasis has particularly been on us adding value to our resources so that we can go into meaningful trade where whatever resources we have, whether it is the agricultural products, whether it's minerals or whatever resource, we add value, we do processing so that we can fetch more money on the product. And that was central to the discussion that he was having both in Russia as well as in Serbia.
But Honorable Minister,
yes.
Do you get concerned, especially before even this summit began,
yes,
that there were threats of sanctions being slapped on African countries? Is this a concern for us as a government, both directly and indirectly?
We hold those issuing threats with contempt because we are a sovereign country. And like I have said, we don't take decisions to please anybody. If country X has issues with Russia, we don't have to necessarily have issues with Russia simply because you have issues with Russia. And we have taken a very strong view on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Like I said, that's why when a vote was being taken, we abstained. We didn't vote yes or no, and we had reasons. Because we have enjoyed diplomatic relations with Russia, and despite the global dynamics, we don't have a strong justification to sever the ties with Russia.
Okay.
And therefore, for any strong power or any country to say, to threaten sanctions or threaten punishments. We detest that kind of head-teacher-pupil relationship. We must be treated with respect as a sovereign and independent country. And that's why we went with our shoulders high, and our going there was neither to annoy or please anybody, but because we enjoy the fraternal relationship between Russia and Uganda.
And we're going to get to that, where we discuss, especially where the president in his speech spoke about imperialism, sovereignty. But let me come to the accounting officer for the Ministry of Trade. How does, especially looking at what the president talked about, there was talking about technology, there was talk about electric cars, batteries, and all these things. How do these summits translate into trade and industry in this country?
Thank you very much, Timothy. Thank you for having me. First of all, I would like to say that the world is beginning to realize that they're dealing with elite Africa. It's no longer the Africa where you come and carry gold, carry slaves, carry. We are dealing with elite Africa. Just look at this panel here today. Would you think that you're going to get Honorable Paul O'Mara and now tell him that you're going to go and dig 2 square miles of land and I take away everything? No, the answer is no. So Africa is gaining a very big bargaining power. And one of the things that they have deliberately done, for example, to make Africa look more attractive and more consolidated post-colonial times, is to go into trade buckets. For example, we have now the AFCFTA, which is now consolidating the whole of Africa. We are trying to build a 1.5 billion market for just intra-Africa trade alone to facilitate trade. Now, if we make ourselves attractive and we can trade within, like for example, when we had COVID and all the prices of cod palm oil were going up because there's a war in Russia, with Russia and Ukraine, we didn't realize that Congo next door had cod palm oil. And one of the things is that they speak French, we speak English, so we don't really find each other attractive in terms of doing business. Because every time you're going to talk to your neighbor and your brother, you are only divided by geographical boundaries. You will have to get a translator or get Google Translate or things like that. But now we are beginning to realize that we need to form a secretariat which is going to bring all of us together, and then we can increase our intra-Africa trade. Look at the travel alone. When I'm going to Algeria, I actually first go to Europe. I get out of Africa, go to Europe, whether it is Istanbul or Dubai, then I cross over to Algiers. How is that economic? Is that going to facilitate trade? Now, of course, when we are doing bilaterals with different countries, we look at these aspects which are going to remove the non-tariff barriers within us as countries. Now, if it is talking about trade between Africa and Russia, and specifically Uganda, as I understand, if you look at the BRICS arrangement, the BRICS, this is, Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, India. Now, these are very big economic superpowers. We want to spread our markets so that we get good bargaining power for our raw materials, because fundamentally, Africa is very rich at minerals, rich at agricultural raw materials, rich at everything. We are the biggest producers of raw materials in any production value chain, but we get the smallest. If you look at all the value chains, even for example, the coffee that the president was talking about, we get the smallest percentage. Now, within this BRICS arrangement, our Russia is about 141 million people. 141 million people, the population in Russia. And their GDP is about 4 trillion. And if you look at their per capita, it's about $28,000 US. Now, if they come to buy into Uganda, the best we can do for them is give them coffee, because that has been our biggest export to Russia. But our coffee, which is about 12 million US, only accounts for 0.8% of Russian import of coffee. Now, for me, my thing is, why don't we increase our production in coffee and then invite Russia to partner with us to do value addition? Because these people have been very clever. There's something that we call, in trade, it's a bit technical, but the reason that people like why we left the International Coffee Organization is because we were being shortchanged for 23 years, shortchanged on the price of our coffee, the green bean. And yet, this green bean is actually used as a flavor in German coffee of about 12 flavors. It is used as an aroma in about 12 flavors, and they get a lot of money for it, over $12. The minimum is $12 per kilogram. Now, for us as Uganda, when we go off and say we are going to find our own market, so there's this book they call the tariff book. It's international. When you do World Trade Organization, it's international. Now, when Uganda goes and gets the green bean out of agricultural production, when we are giving them green bean, we are welcome. They say, oh yeah, bring it and bring the green bean. When we do value addition and we start processing this coffee, after they have made it duty-free on the green bean, they start introducing a tax at about 17%. Why would you introduce the tax? Just because I have done value addition, so you also start to increase the tax. So this escalation of tax, whenever we are doing value addition, to discourage us on production is what we don't like. If it is tariff-free, duty-free, quota-free, let it be so. And let African countries also fight for their space. In West Africa, they've begun to fight for their space. On cocoa, you've been seeing that kind of arrangement. They've said they're not selling their cocoa just like that. They are now getting a very huge bargaining power on their raw material, cocoa, which is used in so many things, cosmetics, chocolates, and you name it. So I think this is the best way that Uganda should go. We can increase our production of coffee and increase the value of our coffee by increasing processing. And maybe the negotiations on our tariff lines, we can do our bilaterals with the BRICS countries.
And I like what you're saying and giving an example of coffee, but let's talk about some of the things the president spoke about. Electric cars, batteries. Is this an area that we also need to be looking at, especially, and how does that translate into an ordinary Ugandan's pocket? Into an ordinary Ugandan's pocket, it's still high-end. It's a sustainable development. Really, if you look at the green cars and all the batteries, I think first of all, we have the raw materials. We can feed into their value chains very easily, and they give us a good deal so that we can negotiate. For us, it's about opportunities. It's about widening the market and about widening the market for our raw materials. So if Russia can come in and take our raw materials into all the production of all those electricals, computers, and the green cars, for us it's a good thing. And also reduction in carbon dioxide. All this is the green agenda is alive, and it is something that Africa should also wake up to, especially if we are looking to grow in their economies. So what it really means in someone's pocket, once we are third world countries, actually we are labeled LDCs, low development countries, as a standard, including Uganda, in the standards of trade. So in the pocket of Wananchi, if my pocket is going to only have 5,000 Uganda shillings a day that I make, it's going to be hard for me to even perceive the concept of buying that car. However, if my home area is, for example, producing iron ore, it might actually give me school fees for my children when they are mining the iron ore from my local area and giving me some money for this iron ore they are taking to develop social services in our schools, hospitals, and all those things, and provide employment. And that is the immediate that I see. We're going to come back to industry, especially because those are heavy. But Honorable Mara, let me come to you. What does Africa, Uganda, and Russia stand to benefit from such summits? Especially it's good talking, a lot of things agreed upon, trade, security, sciences. But what does Uganda and Africa stand to benefit from this?
Thank you very much, Timothy, and the panelists and the viewers. Before I delve into the African-Russian relationships, I just need to explain the issues that caused the meltdown in the international politics, geopolitics, and so forth. When the Russians had the military invasion of Ukraine, the US, with its NATO alliance, came in and provided sanctions against Russia, and the EU were basically the major importers of gas from Russia. They started pulling down the stops, and the only avenue where the Russians could sell their gas and other products, whether it's wheat or so forth, was basically China. And then also, please remember that for almost 80 years, the US, with the European alliance, had dominated the global politics and commerce and military exposition for a very long time, unchallenged. Now, so when the invasion happened in Ukraine, the Russians started saying, you know what are we going to do with this existential threat? And remember, there's what we call the dollarization of the global commerce, where in 1973, Richard Nixon of the US and I think the Sultan Aziz of Saudi Arabia agreed that the international trade, as long as you're buying oil, it should be the transaction, the exchange should be in the US dollars. That is where the petrodollar issue started from. And later on, the OPEC countries joined in 1975. So the US dollars became the global reserve currency, where almost all central banks across the world would use US dollar as their reserve currency. Now, when this invasion happened, and then the US and the EU alliance reacted, the NATO alliance reacted so much with sanctions and almost taking the Russians out of the SWIFT systems, that made China and Russia to start looking at alternatives. And by the way, Putin then told the EU, I don't need your dollars or euros. You now need to pay my gas in
Rubles.
And then the oil which was being exported and the gas and other wheat which was being exported to China was now being settled in yuan, not in the US dollars. And consequently, the BRICS, which the PS has talked about, started saying, why don't we look for an alternative currency and level of trade? And I want to inform the viewers that the US economy, the size of the US economy, is about $26 trillion. Now, when you put the BRICS together, the BRICS, the total economy, is $27 trillion. And interestingly, many countries now want to join the BRICS, including Iran, which is actually where the oil, all of the world, the reserves are in. All those countries want to join BRICS. Then even Egypt is in. So Africa, as a continent, is beginning to look at BRICS and another alternative to the US and EU foreign domination. And that now brings you to actually the geopolitics. So that invasion and the reaction of NATO has shifted the geopolitical, economic, and military matrix. And so when Putin now invites the African leaders, it is happening at a time whereby the global politics and economy is no longer the same. Unfortunately for the Americans and the EU, we passed a law here recently on homosexuality. And the immediate reaction is to say we are going to provide sanctions we are going to cut off the support to PAFA, which is equivalent to $1 billion. And I remember the president at the time said, it's okay if you take the money, you can take it, we'll look for alternative somewhere. So the Uganda's neutral position, even as the minister said in the UN, I think is a good one because we are basically non-aligned. If you have an enemy, you don't. He's not actually my enemy. I think that's the correct position to have. And so I think when President Museveni and their African leaders walked to Russia, they went there with their heads high. I want to agree with Mr. Minister, and I was very pleased to see how President Museveni greeted Putin. Unlike other African leaders who are going like this, he said, hello, how are you? We are equal partners in trade. Which was, in terms, those who have studied body language, basically realized the man was, he went there, he knew what he was going for trade. And so, as that one is happening in terms of global shift in dominance and in where we think other nations are small, for Africa, it's given us opportunity now to engage Russia in a very good way. I think Russia is now also looking to Africa and saying, wait, if you don't want me, we have now the BRICS. Our total GDP put together is bigger than yours. We are a strong military, and we have everything that you have. And so Africa is looking for partners that will come to it with respect, with mutual respect, will not come to exploit us. And Russians actually said, Putin said, for as long as you know, we have never come to Africa to really exploit you. We have not exploited Africa. We have never come here to take your gold for free. We have not taken slaves. And so we can have a mutual conversation. So coming home, President Museveni talked about a couple of things. One, of course, he talked about coffee, which the PS has ably explained, to say our export, the global export of coffee, is $460 billion. Africa only gets 2.4 billion. What Germany gets, about $6.5 billion, is bigger than what Africa gets. And so he's saying, this is really unfair. Can you come home here, we have a conversation, we improve on this product. And I listened to him, he's saying, you know, as a policy, you and China have a policy which says we are not going to import coffee beans from Africa. As a policy, we are going to get final products. So that at least, for us, we are now manufacturing some coffee here. When we add value, we now can acquire more income. And then secondly, military support, military alliance. We have been very close to Russia in terms of weaponry. We are actually an island of peace in a very troubled neighborhood.
And Honorable, let's leave that because I want to pick it up later to bring Mali, Burkina Faso,
yes,
and the Central African Republic in the conversation. Let me bring Honorable Mapendus into this conversation. Honorable, when I look at the numbers that the PS has given us, the biggest trade for Russia in Africa is 44% is arms. Foreign direct investment is just 1% of what they bring to Africa as a continent. What bargaining power do we have as a continent, but also as Uganda? Honorable Mara speaks about the body language of the president, but do we have bargaining power as Africa? When you look at the speech from the president, Captain Turan, when he was speaking, he spoke like there's a problem in Africa. When you would see another president from Congo speaking, you were wondering if we're one continent, chasing the same agenda or different agendas. Can we have that collective bargaining power as Africa?
Well, I want to, from just as you started, according to Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, between 2017 and 2021, about 44% of the arms that came into Africa, or different African countries bought, originated from Russia. But you see, again, if you want to talk about And I have followed the discussions, you know, when the summit was going on. I followed different international news, you know, channels. You hear what the CNN is bringing out, what the BBC is bringing out. When you try to follow Al Jazeera, the story is a bit, these other news channels, you hear how the stories are being twisted and painted differently, and it's probably what the Western world would want to paint. But you see, the countries that went for this summit understand well why they went. And Russia also had a very clear agenda for having this summit. When you look at, and there should be no much, you know, panic. Well, there is a lot of politics globally, but I think African countries have to decide whether the opinion from the Western world will determine the kind of friendship they build. And I think it's important to make it clear that friendship should not be built based on threats and blackmail. If you want to understand the relationship Uganda and the other African countries have had with Russia, and that should settle the dust. It's not starting today. When you look at when Uganda became independent on 9th of October 1962, on the 11th and 12th of October, just 2 days after Uganda became independent, the Soviet Union established diplomatic relations with Uganda. 2 days after Uganda becoming independent, they came in immediately. And then in 1964, they signed the first trade agreement with Uganda, and later on signed another economic agreement. And that same year gave about 14 million rubles to Uganda in form of a loan. And well, that time it was about 500 and something million, but that is 1964. And there are many other things that the relationship between Uganda and Russia brought in. When you look at in Lira, the spinning mill. The spinning mill in Lira was built by Russia in the 70s. When you look at Busitema Agricultural, you know, Mechanized Agricultural Institute, also in the 70s. And then you look at, by mid-80s, there were so many Ugandans taken to Russia to be trained. And some of them are very prominent people today. People like Engineer Ilaronet got trained in Russia.
Yeah.
Engineer Biabagambe got trained in Russia. They are professors there. And these are people who are trained deliberately to come back and take part in building the nation Uganda. So that explains the kind of relationship. And I think it's important to look at it from that angle. It's not something starting now. It is something that has been going on for. And then when you look at most of these, you know, Africa as a statement, you look at Kwame Nkrumah, you look at Patrice Lumumba, including President Museveni. These are people who were supported by Russia during the liberation struggle. Julius Nyerere, Samora.
The African,
yes.
The ANC in South Africa?
Yes, Nelson Mandela and the ANC. So and that is the kind of friendship that we should be talking about. You need a friend who is able to walk with you, you know, whether you're in happiness or in sadness. But that doesn't mean you abandon the other friends. All right?
And we're going to come to that friend.
Yeah, there are many friends, but also you now, because if Professor Sally is my friend, and Honorable Omara is also my friend, and then Honorable Omara wants to begin dictating the kind of friendship I should have with Professor Sally, then I need to begin figuring out how to deal with him, because that kind of friendship is not sustainable.
How do you manage the balancing act there? Because the East and the West is now at play.
Well, it
and
goes.
the undertones are there.
I think this should be a learning point for African countries. African countries have to be bold, we have to be firm, we need to determine what kind of relationship we... This mentality of, this dependency syndrome, begging attitude, and that's the kind of perception, that's the kind of culture that has been built. And because African, leaders are beginning to wake up and know, we have all this wealth, we can do better, we can negotiate better, we can actually begin to do value addition internally instead of... The tone is beginning to change. And that is sending a different kind of message to other countries. But I think for Russia, it's good. Because if Putin is able to say, look, we are not interested in getting this or getting that, we want to work with you, we want to build partnership. The discussion should be about building partnership, should be about depending on one another based on well-laid basis. But then if Uganda goes to Russia to attend this summit and another country begins to threaten Uganda, why you attended? Then I think that is a relationship that is not sustainable. But the solution is in being firm and saying, look, we can determine what is good for us. We value the relationship with you, but it shouldn't stop us from relating with the others. Because Uganda has targets. You don't go to Russia to take tea. You go to Russia to look at opportunities, to negotiate deals, to look at how you can strategically position your country, what you can achieve from that. But also it's about building network. In this world, you don't live alone. You need one another.
Okay.
And just like, of course, there are people who think Russia is being isolated by the Western world because of the war, but it doesn't stop him from relating with the other countries. So Russia as a country needs a shoulder to lean on. So if it's coming to Africa, and it's based on very frank and honest discussion, and clearly on how Africa is going to benefit and use its own resources and whatever is available, I think that is something that is okay.
Okay.
So the discussion should be about how do we take advantage, and Uganda should be strategic. And I commend the president for leading his team from the different stories we followed. I think our participation was I think there is something that can be achieved from that.
Okay.
And it's important to push, to keep on following. So it's not just about attending, but getting a lot out of it, and it helps in pushing the country forward.
Professor, when we look at these summits, especially the one that has just happened, let's leave the smoke around it. Let's get to the nitty-gritties here. Did Africa benefit from this summit? Looking at what we have just been talking about, BRICS, the consolidation there, and almost seeming like we went there like lone rangers. Uganda went there as a lone ranger to get what it needs to leverage from. Burkina Faso went there to do the same. What is stopping us to be a collective force?
Thank you very much, Timothy, and good evening, viewers. Well, I don't see any problem with going there as lone rangers, because one, I don't think we went there as lone rangers, but in case we went there as lone rangers, it wouldn't be a problem. I think politics is about interests. Different countries have their own interests, and it is important for these countries to front their interests. Of course, in the frameworks of the AU and other things, they can decide to have a consolidated interest. But if, for example, one country wants to negotiate trade in terms of exporting natural resources, and another one wants to negotiate trade to export fruits, I don't think that should be a problem, and it should be should be allowed. I think the PS said earlier that you're no longer engaging with an illiterate Africa, which you can appease with anything. You're definitely dealing with a very elite group of people who have studied, who know what they want. So they're not going to just be bundled into some collective to speak with one voice. All the countries that went for this summit had a reason for why they went for this summit. I imagine in their countries, they planned, they organized, they were delegations. And so it was okay for them to advance their interests. Politics is about interests. I think the problem we've suffered as Africa in the past before is to assume other people are going to plan for us. So we go there, we trust other people to be benevolent enough to have good interests for us. So there's nothing wrong with different countries going with their interests. So that is one thing. And like everyone has said, of course, Russia has had a history with us. And it was not just a history of romantic friendship, it has been a history which was of strategic interest to rid the continent of colonialism. And as you said, they haven't had much trade, and it is nothing bad to expand the trade, because we all know we deal in a world system or a world economic system where there are quotas. Not all of the coffee you produce is going to be bought by those who need to buy it. So if for some reason African countries realize that, well, we need to expand markets, and there is this market which can take more, there's nothing wrong with it. And I think also, one thing also we need to remember historically, it's not the first time power balances are changing. If you read history, I mean, we had the Portuguese control of the world, they were overtaken by the Dutch, the French, the British we are talking about are actually latecomers, 18th century kind of people, but they managed to dominate the world. So if for some reason forces are changing, that the BRICS are beginning to dominate, I mean, that is just the nature of history, that powerful countries rise and others go down. And of course, historians document why one country came up and another country went down. And I think that should not shock us, and that is something you should prepare for. But Timothy, there are things which puzzle me, and especially that have puzzled me in the recent week. We've been told, of course, we haven't been following Niger very much until recently. But the sad thing is to know that Niger's uranium powers France's nuclear reactors to provide them with energy, and Niger doesn't have electricity, doesn't have power. I know there's some exchange of pharmaceuticals and the rest, but that alone says a problem. We are, of recent, as an elite African crowd, we keep saying we are the richest country in the world. But why are our people struggling to run away from this continent? They are sinking in the Mediterranean. The interesting thing was, in this last week, 4 Nigerians living on above the radar of a ship, which they thought was heading to Europe. They ended up in Brazil. 14 days on the sea. Nigeria is very rich with a lot. So what is it we need to do for this continent so that at the end of the day, our younger people stay? Why this paradox? We are the richest continent, but everyone is running away from it. And as I've said, back looking at the history of whether you are talking about the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, everyone, every power that has arisen has had Africa and its resources in its rise. So what is it we need to do differently? So if for some reason this is the way to go, and one phrase I liked about this summit was sovereign development for the benefit of humankind. So the issue of sovereignty was put clearly at the center. So there could be all the other talk of course, Russia is isolated and it is lonely and it is everything. And for me, what I'm interested in is what are the interests of the people who went to the summit? And what do they seek to benefit from there? But also we would ask, this is not the first Africa summit. There is a US Africa summit, there's a French Africa summit, there's a Turkish Africa summit, there's a Chinese African summit. There's always an African summit somewhere. But why do we remain the way we are? If you go back to the time when China was a friend to the continent and helped us fight a number of liberation wars during the time of the Cold War, of course, growing up in those days, we were told Russia was a very big enemy, it was anti-Christian, it was everything. Now, the continent got, of course, with the coming down of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain, we all went under the neoliberal economic order. Is the continent a better place today? It is actually worse than it was in the 70s. There's no welfare for the people, industry died, those who we've always known as friends want to give us largely capacity building, not much of infrastructure development. No. What was our president fronting at the Russia summit? It was infrastructure development, okay? it was trade, it was export. It was all these things on mutually respectful terms. Of course, if they turn out to be disrespectful, we shall move on. No one ties us there, okay? So for me, the whole celebration is knowing that Africa has suddenly realized they have interests of their own, and they are going to front these interests and trade with those who respect those interests. And maybe we're only talking about trade and politics, but there was a lot which happened on the sidelines of this. First of all, it's not just the president and his politicians who went. Traders also went. Small and medium-term enterprises also went to look for opportunities. Universities went. Our Vice Chancellor, for example, signed a number of MOUs in strategic areas of agriculture, of science and development, of soil fertility. So a lot happened on this. So you had universities collaborating, traders also collaborating, politicians talking. I don't know what else was happening there. I didn't go. But I think it is an opportunity. And I don't think we should just focus on Africa vis-a-vis the others. I think the entry point in this discussion is what does Africa need, and which is the best place for Africa to have these needs met. And just to know that this is not the first time. History works like that. So we should make sure with every historical epoch, our interests are clear and they are advanced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Honorable Minister, let me come back to you. Looking at some of the things that she has mentioned, all these arguments that have been made, very interesting to have them there. But also there was a statement made, especially with the different political heads, including our president, when he talked about imperialism, the relationship with Russia, how far we have come, the sovereignty of our countries there. These statements made, don't they put us at a loggerhead between the East and the West? And isn't this a delicate balance for us as a country?
Well, like all of us have said, we demand that we be respected by other countries, because gone are the days when people would think they would come here, just invade us and take us as slaves and just plunder our resources in a raw form. I think like the PS here said, the landscape now is different in Africa. We have gone to school, we have seen the light, and nobody should coerce us to be subordinate to him or her. We need to be treated as equal and sovereign states. So I can as well say we are neither pro-West or pro-East. We are pro-Africa, we are pro-Uganda. And we have to push for our own interests. So for those who think that Africa should still be seen as a very weak community, and therefore you can just dictate, or that an African leader should keep watching who is behind before he says something, I think we have since moved away from that. And let me hope that the heads of state who didn't turn up maybe feared to go. I want to assume that they had other commitments. But we thank our president. I think he has a strong backbone. He's not really bothered by those kind of threats. Like Honorable Mara said, you saw the threats when we passed the anti-homosexuality law. The threats which were directed at the president, threatening him not to sign. But he took a bold decision that I sign on behalf of Ugandans, not on behalf of Americans or Europeans or those who cherish homosexuality. So I think increasingly African leaders have to be very bold and defend and protect the interests of the people that they represent and not foreign interests. We do not want really to be taken as second-class citizens, because we are not children of a lesser God. The same God who created those so-called powerful is the same God who created us Africans. So we have since moved away, and I don't think we should be boxed into a corner to just be seen as small children. Even, yes, we may be poor, if you call it. We may be poor, but not desperate, that we should just be on our knees because of the so-called superpowers. So what we want is that mutual respect. What we want is to look at opportunities available. And of course, we have a lot of work to do as African leaders and as African countries.
What do we bring on the table?
Yes?
As Africa, what do we bring on the table?
Oh.
You want to be equal partners, so what are you bringing on the table? What are you leveraging on that they should call you equal partners?
Well, the other way of putting it is that why is everybody interested in Africa? Why are they all scrambling to have these summits? Africa, Turkey, Africa, US, Africa, Russia, Africa, China. Why? There must be something attractive about Africa. And
actually, we are bringing a lot on the table.
A lot, yes. Africa,
we bring the uranium, we bring the gold, we bring
Africa
gold.
Yeah.
is the continent
Copper.
of the future if we put our act together as African leaders. When you look at the resources that we do have, say the mineral resources, the natural resources in Africa, it's plenty. And we just need to build our capacity and awareness and consciousness. Like the president has been saying, let's not allow these resources to be taken away in a raw form. You see, look at the DRC. The reason why it has had these perennial conflicts, these all superpowers wanting to actually steal the resources from DRC. So the leadership of Africa needs to be very firm. And we push the message that Uganda has been pushing, especially our president, that let us not just waste our resources by exporting raw materials, because like you were saying, Germany doesn't grow coffee, but it earns more from coffee than the coffee growers.
$6.5 billion.
Absolutely like that. Congo,
Honorable Minister, doesn't that make the case for what I'm actually asking you, what we're leveraging on?
Yes.
If Germany does not grow coffee
Yes.
and leverages more on coffee that it gets than us who do the hard work, what are we bringing on the table? Because
yes, and what are we bringing on the table? We are saying now we have woken up. We are saying we are the ones who are growing this coffee. If you heard the president was saying, make it a policy as Russia, these countries, not to import raw materials from our countries.
Yes.
If we are to have a genuine partnership, then also look at it from a perspective of you coming to invest to add value to our products here in Uganda and in Africa, so that we have a mutual and beneficial relationship, not a relationship which is parasitic, where you come and suck what is from us, and then Professor was saying, our children started drowning in the Mediterranean Sea simply because we are not creating jobs. Because if we process the coffee, the tea, the minerals, that means we shall establish factories, industries, create jobs, and these many younger people we have in Africa will then be employed here. So that's the kind of negotiation and discussion that was taking place. Because in addition to the General Summit, our president had a bilateral discussion with the president of Russia, and all these issues were put on the table. That yes, we should respect this partnership, but the partnership should be beneficial to both sides, but not one which benefits one side, and for us we are at the losing end. So the African leaders must be very bold and protect the interests of Africans, because we have a lot of richness in terms of the resources that we have.
Madam Permanent Secretary, let me come to you. It's amazing how we talk about how rich Africa is. And I heard you and Professor talk about cobalt, uranium, all these things. But how do we harness all these rich, yet seemingly with poor and holy pockets?
Thank you very much. Now, you realize that Africa is hungry for trade justice. I lack a better word, but this thing they call fair trade is not exactly fair. It's not fair. They coin it to mentally get us on board, and then we sort of sign these agreements, and in the belief that we are actually earning an equal bargaining power for our raw materials. But in actual sense, when you see the purchasing power of the money you get out of this so-called fair trade, it's not enough for you to come in and go back to do investments in your country to do value addition. Now, for example, when you look at things to do with this coffee, and I'm going to be stuck on coffee. It is very easy to see. If you take your coffee to America, you're not necessarily going to get money. And what the BRICS have done, they formed this BRICS Business Council, and it has been deliberate to iron out, to give us foreign direct investments, and to also have bilateral investment opportunities with other countries, and themselves, the member states, and also to remove all the non-tariff barriers. These are the things that make me more attractive and increase the value addition and the bargaining power of my raw material. So for me, I am not really convinced that and let me tell you, Africa is has got the biggest chunk of land for food production. 80% of the free land for agriculture is in Africa.
Yeah.
I've not even started on the resources. So we should be really the masters on food security because we are gifted by nature. Much as we do fertilizers, and we get all these fertilizers from Russia, Israel, and all these countries, but really they should be helping us boost our production. So he who controls the food controls the economy. At least you will have about 60% before the arms come in, because even the guy who's shooting and they have arms, they must eat. You will not have men on the front line who are not eating. So the first thing is survival. We have to have food. Now, for food security is one of the key areas that Africa can capitalize on, because we have got the land and we are gifted by nature. We can actually do a food security agenda that can help Africa. All these things that you hear of warehousing, to regulate food and prices, to regulate imports, exports of food, that is where our biggest competence is. Then on the materials, the raw materials like minerals, almost, if you look at just Congo alone, I understand the world's minerals, almost like 56% actually live in Congo. No wonder, like the minister said, it has a lot of wars there. Now, if we have people like this who are willing to look at us on the table as equal partners in trade investments, then we can command a respect for our purchasing power on our money. And then we can trade in currencies which are flexible to Africa and to our business partners. Because why would I be the one to have a low currency denomination in yours, yet it's me who has the minerals? Why are you not underwriting this currency in me who has the minerals? Why isn't my currency the one of high value? What have you got, yet you're the one actually taking my raw materials?
I've never understood that economics.
I have also never understood that. It's like it's like daylight robbery. But also the final thing, Timothy, is on the perpetuity in loans and debt for African countries.
Yeah.
Some of this is meant to be deliberate, because it's a transformation of a continued slavery mentality. So we sign off these loans in the belief that they're actually supplementing and helping us on our economy, but they are perpetually leaving us financially enslaved and unable to recuperate and build our economies. So I think we should get into the subsidized loans. You give us an interest, give me an interest which is a subsidy, negative 0.06%, like you're giving North Korea or South Korea. Those people are actually taking loans at subsidized rates, yet they are developed countries. Why can't you do that for me as a developing country in Africa, as a partner, if you really mean well for me? But if you're going to give me 3% on the dollar, what am I going to do with that when I'm going to be promoting agriculture, which is not even mechanized and commercialized?
Sticking with you before I come to Honorable Mara, two things. One, two-folded question. There's a saying, a jack of all trades, a master of none. We seem to be everywhere and not focusing as a country. As a trade docket, what areas do we need to focus on, especially with such summits and such agreements? But also, secondly, what framework needs to be in place as the person behind there in the kitchen? What needs to be in place that this lands well and benefits everyone?
You're right, actually, because for most of the bilaterals and multilateral discussions that we've had, that have been part of, the biggest interest in, especially like the Ugandan market, is mainly grain, fruits and vegetables, coffee. That is the main thing that everybody wants from Uganda. And we don't have enough of it. We do not have enough supply for whatever we are producing because, one, we have not commercialized, we have not mechanized. Now, if Russia can come in and boost our side of mechanization on agriculture, if they can come in a very big way to boost the biofertilizer, and I'm really deliberate about biofertilizer for the obvious reasons. We can have a discussion on a different day. And we look at the standardization and remove and improve on quality, basically. And then the packaging to improve competitiveness. I think we would be in a very good place. So all these negotiations we've had, we actually go in there, we sign all these agreements, but Ugandans are not taking these opportunities because, one, they are not aware. Secondly, they do not have the capacity. So if the milk value chain has done very well because they've actually come together, the different companies and the key players, to boost the volumes to feed into the demands in different countries. And you have seen like Algeria is really interested in our milk. And if we can do the same now and we get organized and look at each value chain, look at the infrastructure around it, the cold infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, like the roads, and we look at the soft infrastructure, like the systems, monitoring movement of all these goods and services, I think we would be in a very good place to boost our economy.
Thank you very much. Honorable Mara, before we even take a break, you have spoken about at length the history, Russia in Africa, Russia in South Africa, helping liberate what was in South Africa there, calling Nelson Mandela, God rest his soul in peace, a rebel, but also this whole thing of neo-colonialism. Let's go further. Russia and China seeming to be in bed, trying to change, especially what you call the dollarism, to the ruble. Yeah. The economic powers, won't we be the grass in this change between China and Russia, the US and the rest of Europe?
Yeah, it is true. The Russians and the Chinese are pushing what they call the multipolar currency position, which is basically a shift away from the US dollar dominated currency for international trade, because they believe that dollarization has created a lot of vulnerability in very many economies and great imbalance in the world economies. And now Russia prefers the yuan, because as you know, China's economy is the second largest to the US, almost about almost going to 19 or 20 trillion dollars. Now, so the Russians are happy to get yuan as the next currency. But the problem also is acceptability, because the US, make no mistake, the US dollars as a global currency controls almost about 60 to 70% of global trade, which means in the global transactions we use US dollars. In our reserves here in Uganda, if you ask Dr. Tinge, Bank of Uganda, our reserves are in US dollars, and many central banks across the world. So even if they're going to have a shift in yuan as another alternative multi-currency, yes, preferred by them and also other global players, the issue of liquidity and acceptability remains a challenge. Although the global community where we live now requires a multi-currency positioning, so that there is no particular currency that dominates the world. The unfortunate thing for Africa is that we have not yet moved towards, everything has been left with the Kwame Nkrumah and the founders of the African Union, or OAU. Now we are in AU. We should be looking at having an African currency, Because if you move from here to Kenya, you have to convert the currency. You cannot even convert shillings to Kenya shilling in Kenya. You need to have a US dollar. The same thing if you are going to Ethiopia, you have to you go with a US dollar and change in the local currency. Whoever is gaining is the US, not us. Because every exchange rate gain goes to the US, and they control the global economy. So as Africa, we should be saying, okay, the BRICS have started a journey towards creating some kind of an economic bloc. The Russians and the Chinese prefer yuan as an alternative currency, which still has to have acceptability because the economy of China is big. All of us are now in Africa, we are going to China for literally everything, which means yuan is a tradable currency. But for us as Africa, we should be looking at an African currency, which is for all of us. Then with that, we can promote intra-African trade easily. You don't have to go through convertibility to lose currencies and so forth. We can trade in Africa without any problem and increase intra-African trade, something which the PS has already alluded to. So we have to be very careful. I think we need more cohesion more than ever before, because the way the world is going now, if you are small, you're basically eaten. Mm-hmm. And there are voices that are beginning to come out. Ruto is a major proponent. The young man coming from Burkina Faso is talking about it. I think our president is more pragmatic and bold and saying, yes, our history indicates clearly that the East have been more friendly to us, and Cuba helping us in the African liberation. So when we come to Russia, we are not coming as visitors, we're coming as friends. And you don't have to begrudge us for coming, because historically they have been with us. And the same thing is telling Russians, no, if we are going to the US, we are going to promote trade and relationships. It has got nothing to do with you. It's about building trade relationships. So to answer your question, the world is moving. It will never be the same. The war in Ukraine, the sanctions against Russia, the geopolitical arrangements between China and Russia, and now Africans are moving in, and the BRICS creation. The world can't go back the same.
Okay.
And now they're talking about de-dollarization. In other words, bring in other currencies. And Ruto is saying, if I'm to trade with Uganda, why should I trade in dollars? Does it make sense? If I'm trading with South Africa, why should I use dollars? As Africans, can't you create, I don't want to go to the complex matters of international finance, but we can have an account as Uganda in the South African currency. And we trade. And if they want something here, they have the accounts here in shillings. And we trade. So this is something that we need to think about. And I can tell you, the global economy and politics are not run by dunderheads. We just need to get these African brains that the PS has talked about to pull these things together and go into a thinking box as Africa and as Ugandans and say, how do we now take opportunities given this dynamics which is happening around us?
Okay.
That should be the conversation.
Let's take a break here and get into our think tank here, and we'll be giving you more when we come back about the country, but also what does that mean for us in our pockets. Listen more after this break.
These days, our homes are no longer just the places we live. It's where we attend meetings, go to class, keep each other safe, and entertain ourselves. To do this smoothly, you need a reliable internet connection. Buy the MTN WakaNet router, which connects up to 32 devices and gets a free 40 GB data bundle at only 149,000 shillings. Or buy the MTN WakaNet MiFi at only 75,000 shillings and enjoy a free 15 GB bundle to stream, study, work, and play on the go. Visit any MTN service center to buy the MTN Wakanet router or MiFi and enjoy the internet that does amazing things.
Juko. Yo. Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Step into the future of African coffee at the second G25 Africa Coffee Summit hosted by Uganda. The summit will be held at Speak Resort Munyonyo from the 8th to the 10th of August 2023. Heads of state from Africa's 25 coffee growing nations and coffee value chain actors will delve into the theme, Transforming the African Coffee Sector through Value Addition. The summit is a defining moment for Africa's coffee growing nations. It's time to listen, innovate, and invest in Africa's coffee future, ignite the potential of African coffee. Organized by the Government of Uganda through the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries and Uganda Coffee Development Authority in collaboration with the Inter-African Coffee Organization.
Are you tired of high fees and slow transfer time when sending money? Airtel Money is here to revolutionize the way you move your money. We have revised our rates back to ground. Sending money from Airtel to other networks in Uganda, East Africa, and to the rest of the world has never been more affordable. Dial *185# and start sending money. Switch to Airtel Money today and experience unbeatable rates and top-notch services for all your local and international money transfer needs. Airtel Money. Instant, secure, borderless.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. In the studio, I'm joined by a gallant panel that is discussing everything the Russia-African Summit, and we're trying to make perspective of what opportunities, engagements happen there. Let me get some of your feedback, then be able to get back into our conversation here. We have some feedback coming through on Twitter. I need to get to it. Yes, it's right there. We all know America is supporting Ukraine in the conflict. How are we confident that the issue of showing our side of the conflict won't backfire severely on us? That's Rogers from Bushenyi. We'll get back to you on that one. Okay. I am shocked by the PS comment regarding translators. What is wrong with using translation to overcome language barriers to trade? More advanced countries like the UK, Germany, China use language services, and Uganda should follow suit instead of trading with English-speaking countries only. We'll clarify on that one. Okay, Michael from Jinja says, if African presidents think that one of the Burkina Faso Africa would have been a very far-fetched. Okay, I think I've missed it.
Would have been very far.
Would have been very far. Timothy, thank you for the show and the program. What would Uganda lose if they missed the Russia-African Summit, at least for 2 years, and show our grievances to the barbaric, inhumane actions against Ukraine when Uganda really survived the COVID pandemic period there? What promotes the war over the economic greed is that Russia is a world monopolist in making batteries Christ save us. Thank you very much. We'll leave the messages at, let me read one more. Joe Pio from Lira. Let Uganda go with Russia if they can help Uganda to develop like other countries in the West. We are tired of the American. Thank you very much for your opinions there. Let me get to Honorable Ojara here, and a lot has been said, especially on the globalization, the global village, the perspective of the economies there. But when we look at this, what are our interests as a country? first and foremost. Secondly, what is our need and not our wants?
Well, our number one interest is that we have got a lot of things that we have as a country. But we are not going to get much out of what we have got if we don't get out to build partnership, to build relationship, to find markets for this. And so when Uganda takes part in this, it's about exploring opportunities. It's about finding markets for what we have got. But it's also about getting people who can come and invest in our country. It's about building bridges. Just like Uganda has a very strong relationship with the US, strong relationship with other countries, Uganda should continue building relationships with other countries, including new ones, that you know, and you know, there is something that we need to consider deeply. One, if a country like Uganda looks at exploring a lot of opportunities that we have got, then we need to strategically look at new markets, but also look at how to expand the old ones. Just like in our villages, you can you go to markets where you know your goods are going to be bought quickly, but you also go to markets where you think you are going to discover, you know, new opportunities, and this is the way to go. So it's not about just having so much and sitting and thinking somebody is going to come. It's about getting out there, getting, you know, making what we have got, the opportunities available, known, and attracting people to come. Uganda needs to play a lot in terms of marketing ourselves, because just like the PS put it, yes, there could be lots of opportunities, but what are we going to gain, or how are we going to make use of these opportunities if we don't market them? And how are we going to position ourselves globally if we don't deliberately get out and create this relationship and network? The other thing that is key to take as a country, you know, we are a country that has got so much land, just like a member put it. And you know, Russia and many other countries need some of these, you know, products that we produce. So if we have got land, and if we want to make good use of this, you know, we want to get from what is available, then we need to deliberately exploit the market, the available market, get to the global market and try to position ourselves, negotiate fair deals, and we will be able to, you know, develop as a country.
Thank you very much, Honorable Jara. Professor, the word neocolonialism has been thrown around a lot. Here, there, Russia is coming. Is Russia our saving grace especially, or are they the new form of neocolonialism? Because when you spoke about Burkina Faso, we also speak about Central African Republic, where they have militias there. We'll talk about Wagner later.
Sorry. Thank you, Timothy. Well, one thing I was taught in political science class is you never get free by changing masters.
Yeah.
You get free
Yeah.
by seeking freedom and by determining your destiny. So I don't see what happened at the summit as a space of looking for another master. What happened at the summit is people were setting clearly the terms of what they wanted, at least from Uganda's side. So I wouldn't look, of course, if we just went to the summit and were taken like normally people used to use these things as shopping sprees and you bag a few bucks and keep quiet and sail over your country, that would really be a neocolonial approach. And already we are stuck with other neocolonialists anyway, so we are in a bad shape. So we are trying to break the chains of the neocolonialism we are stuck with by actually getting another partner and asserting ourselves differently. That's why you're hearing all these conversations of we are tired of being patronized, we want to be respected. So we are trying to decolonize, we are trying to end the neocolonialism. So what I saw happening at the summit were people stating clearly what they wanted. For example, our president was clear on infrastructure development. If we had to just use that one thing, that one example, he spoke about many things, but if you talk about infrastructure development, particularly around the issue of the oil pipeline, we know we had people who were going to build the oil pipeline and that they were somehow discouraged. The oil sector is seen as a sector which is likely to have quick spin-offs to do many other things in this country, in terms of employment, in terms of providing services, in terms of taxation, and in terms of that. So if, for example, that infrastructure comes in and those spin-offs begin occurring, you are going to have a country which is determining its destiny better than a country which is only getting aid. When you look at our PDM, okay, which is now the planning model, people are talking about agro-industrialization, okay? So if those kinds of things can come in, and we have better infrastructure, and the country can determine what it wants to do, I think people will in the future treat us more respectfully than us just listening to being dictated to being spoken down on, and to being really told what to do. First of all, we've all said how Russia has a history with us. And one thing we shouldn't forget is Russia is the only big country which has a university named after an African nationalist and fighter, the Patrice Lumumba Friendship University. Some of those things speak much more, okay? The big power, the controlling power, but to us, actually, the history has been a little bit different. It's one country which really wanted to invest in the self-determination of Africa, but never wanted to take a colony and access raw materials. So if it's going to change that character, we shall still be around. And if that relationship doesn't work out, people will change. And Niger will occur if that relationship doesn't. Because what is happening in Niger? People are not happy with the relationship the former president was having, which was actually a very neo-colonial relationship. So we may say they lost cause and whatever, but they are saying this relationship can no longer be sustainable, and we are not interested in it. So it's not really neo-colonialism as of now. I see it as trade and partnership, and we are going to watch the space, and we expect more trade. But really the issue that has to be answered is you have Africa with the youngest population, which is multiplying every day. These people need opportunities. They are not going to simply listen to what others are telling them and the leaders sit. They are going to, these countries will explode. And by the way, as we criticize Russia, we should also be fair and say what have the other countries done differently. Russia is not the only country that gives Africa arms. Many other countries also give Africa arms. Africa is not the only country that has shown interest in Africa. Many have shown interest. So we need to evaluate these relationships and put them on a balance sheet and see what actually works for our country. And basically, we shouldn't forget that what we need is infrastructure to develop. Otherwise, we shall keep singing Africa is the richest country, but our people will continue dying in the Mediterranean. Those people are looking for opportunities. We need to get what is outside, what is inside, on our own terms, refine it how other people have said, and then see how that is going to create jobs, how it's going to create more income, how it will increase taxation, how it provide social services, and by the way, that has been the path of development of all the other countries. No country has developed by simply getting aid and being spoken to. They have developed by actually deciding where their comparative advantage is and have exploited it.
And I like what you said with that. Let's focus home. Yes, Honorable Mara, before I get to the Honorable Minister.
I just wanted to supplement what Professor said. If you look at Africa, in terms of population, Africa is now third. And very soon we are going to take China. China is now about 1.4 billion people, followed by India, which is about 1.3. Africa is third. And it's projected, but because since this is the youngest population is in Africa here, so Africa is going to be bigger in terms of population. And therefore, in terms of global demand and market, Africa will provide a bigger market for the global community. That is actually one of the things that we we will bring on the table in terms of our population. Secondly, the youngest population. A professor will give us the numbers in terms of how many young people our universities are actually throwing out there every year.
Around 40,000 per year.
Around 40,000 young graduates
And
with
don't have
brains.
40,000 jobs coming.
With the brains. During globalization, when we were still doing our masters on globalization, the world was moving to China and India because of the population, the young population were very brilliant, they are good with technology. So now you just need to go across and you get young people who can do the things for you very cheaply. Africa is now providing that particular potential in terms of human capital. So when they come here, for example, to do in transfer of technology to Africa, you're not going to look around for people. There are young people here who will be able to quickly turn around these technologies, learn it quickly, turn around and begin to add value to our crops. And in terms of the military intervention which we are seeing in West Africa, it's actually a cry. Those days during the war between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc, the dictatorship in Africa was basically the ones that are pro-West were purely pro-West, and they were protected. They would take over power and they said, I am pro-West or I'm pro-East. Now what is happening now? These military leaders taking over governments, they are saying, no, we hate neocolonialism. Why would somebody take away over 3,000 tons of uranium to France? And we are here, we are getting nothing. And I think that is a signal to African leaders that the young people, because the military, by the way, is the vanguard of the state. When the politicians messes up everything and there is nothing more, the military will step in and say, we want to bring insanity. So as politicians, we need to make sure that the government policies are geared towards elevating the life of the majority of our people. If we don't do that, if we begin just to hobnob, like for example, in this particular case, Russia, just hobnobbing with Russia for no particular reason, it's not going to help African leaders. Like the same the guys did for the Western world. It must add value. So that's why we are emphasizing that this thing should be about us. It should not be about anybody. So when we add value here, we create the economy that takes care of everyone. Everybody's going to school. Everybody has a canopy over their heads. The children are going to school. They have food. Their welfare is moving forward. Then we are safe. So the militarism, the military intervention which is happening in West Africa is basically a failure of political leaders in managing the economy of countries and making sure that we put the interests of the citizenry first, and basically not simply lining our pockets and feeling comfortable when the rest are in squalid poverty. So I think that is a signal that we must watch.
Oh, Honorable Jara.
Just to add to what Honorable Paul said, I think it's not only a failure on the part of the leaders, it's also partly a failure in getting reliable partners. When you look at most of these countries that are having problems, I have been to Central African Republic. When you go to Central African Republic, a country that has got so much minerals, you go to DRC, you go to most of these countries that are having issues, have got so much, but you see, you look at some of the countries that colonized them and the kind of partnership they've. So it's important that you look at how far you have walked and whether you have benefited from that. And many of the citizens are beginning to realize that, look, I think we have been exploited enough. The resources we have got has not helped, and so it's time to begin looking for people we consider more reliable, who can have meaningful engagement with us, meaningful partnership, and who can, respect who we are and let us benefit from what we have got. So I think that is the direction.
Okay. Honorable Minister, coming to you, I think for me the thought that I need, if these plugs are pulled by the West on funding, on the loans, is government in position to be able to respond to this, especially in key areas like education, like health? What's the response of government?
Okay, before I specifically respond to that, let me just go back into history. That the African governments did not receive independence just like that, with the colonialists just happily living. It was a fight. And even when the African governments attained independence, the neo-colonial hand remained hovering over the African countries. And part of the reason why many countries remained unstable after independence is that the colonialists had not left. That's why in Congo, DRC, Congo got its independence on the 30th of June, 1960. On 17th January 61, they killed Patrice Lumumba, the prime minister. In 1963, they killed Silvanus Olympio in Togo. They overthrow governments like Nigeria, Tafawa Balewa, they remove him. In Ghana, they remove Osajefo Nkrumah, 1965, 66, and caused destabilization. Right? And the beauty with Russia is that Russia was never colonialist, and it was always there to support the countries. Like the reason why Patrice Lumumba was killed. When the Belgians supported an insurrection in the Katanga province, where they were demanding for secession, but to destabilize Congo, and they were pushing Lumumba, he ran to Russia for support. And then the Belgians and the Americans now ganged up to have him killed and so forth.
Yes.
And in 1963, the African heads of state gathered in Addis Ababa, and Kwame Nkrumah said, we must unite before we live here. Let's have one currency, like the Honorable was saying. Let's have one army. Let's have one central bank. Let's become one United States of Africa for us to defeat this. But because of the neo-colonial hand, they could not generate consensus and so forth. So we have gone through all that. And you can see some of the powers outside still want to extend their neo-colonial influence through dictating. If you go to Russia, we shall put sanctions. Don't sign this law. We are not happy with it. But I think, like we have argued, Africans and African leaders have since moved, and we're at a different stage. And we are now realizing that, no, this kind of relationship must be redefined. And we should now defend the interests of Africans. If we go into discussions, let's discuss to look at the beneficial, mutually beneficial relationships and not the master-servant relationship. So I think we are at that stage, and that's why you hear a very strong voice across Africa. Although when you dissect African countries, you will get a feel like, to the extent that countries which were, say, colonized by France, the French domination is still palpable, you still feel it. And those states and countries are not as free and independent as, say, those which were under British and other European countries. You still get that sense within Africa. But I think progressively, the African countries are asserting themselves to say, no. We do not necessarily want aid from you, but we need trade, we need investment, we need business, and we must discuss from that perspective. So, I think increasingly those threats will become empty. To think that at this point you can threaten African countries and then you cow them down, I think it will not work. But definitely African countries, much as, yes, we are pushing our individual country interests, but there is still a strong point for uniting as an African voice, so that when we negotiate and when we resist some of these tendencies, we are united as a joint force as Africa. We should be able to overcome. So yes, if they withdrew their support, shall we be able to survive in terms of providing education, in terms of providing health and other services? I would still say yes. Like we have said, we have lots of resources, we have many young people. Africa is the most fertile continent, and we can harness this demographic dividend and turn this huge population of young people into an asset. And that's why governments are investing heavily in education to give skills, to impart competencies among these young people. When you look at the demographic transition, you will see a number of countries in the Western world, the conceptual Western world, they have aging populations. I have been to Japan, where what used to be primary and secondary schools, the infrastructure has been turned into homes of the elderly. You will hardly see, with due respect, any woman pregnant in the touch and so forth. Now, those changing dynamics can also become an advantage to us. Because they want to put up factories, industries, but they don't have the manpower, to work there. That's why we are arguing that you shift some of these investments, some of these factories to here in Africa.
Yes.
Because we have the young people, the energetic, highly educated, with the fluent English. And therefore, we just need to put our act together as Africa and be able to appreciate our strong points and the demand for respect when we go to the negotiation table and articulate our concerns. And that is what is happening in Russia, that we don't just go there to drink tea and take wine, but no, we go with the proposals. If you examine what the president was raising with the president of Russia, he was saying, can we discuss space technology? Uganda having its own satellite. Can we discuss nuclear power energy? Those are issues he was raising. Can we look at science and technology? Can we look at the oil and gas industry?
Yes.
Because all of these are advantages which we have, and therefore when we discuss, what do you have for us as Russia? So that we discuss as partners. We invite investors from Russia to come and add value to our products here. So if Africa can take that kind of discussion, not to go and beg, not to go and you appear like you are weaker than your colleagues in the Western world. And I think increasingly Africa is demonstrating that kind of strength. And therefore, whether these so-called loans or support that comes, whether it winds off and dries, I don't think Africa will die. We can still survive. We have survived harsher things in Africa. So I think we are increasingly becoming stronger, and we just need to continue asserting ourselves as Africa.
Thank you. Madam Permanent Secretary, let me come to you. Earlier on, before we started the show, you and I were talking about our trade deficit and discussing, what it is, what it looks like. Do these agreements, especially this one, for Uganda's sake, can it make that balance between our exports and imports, especially looking at how we want to substitute them as one, but also two, how do we get Ugandans to come on board with these?
Yes, how we get Ugandans to come on board. As I was saying to you, that the biggest export we have to Russia is really coffee. We don't have so much. And then in return, we import mainly grain, cereal, and machinery of agriculture. And it all comes down to a deficit of $81 million US. So we give them something worth $12 million US, that is our coffee. And then in return, what we are buying is $94 million US. So that deficit, in my view, can be covered by the side of food and coffee. And for us, that is, for the agreements that you're talking about, that is really like chapter 9 of those trade agreements. That's another technical thing that I was telling you about. But this is a standard. And if we can just trade just that one line like this and improve coffee between Uganda and Russia, because that is our biggest export, and they allow us to do value addition and also invest in us on that value chain, I think we would be able to cover the gap in no time. And of course, if they're the ones who have invested, they take first priority. but that at least they would be able to see us as equal partners, and we would be able to negotiate in a bilateral. Because they will come in as Russia, they will come in as Uganda, even if we are part of the East African community, and we are part of the COMESA, and we are also part of AFCFTA. Still, all our regions that feed into that value chain would all benefit.
Just to add to what you're saying, about $2.3 billion in vegetables and fruits that Russia imports. Can't we take advantage of that? But also, the biggest challenges we're having, especially in agriculture, is handling, is how processing, but also
sanitary and phytosanitary.
Thank you very much. There is massive supply, very little demand. How does a person deep in Jinja, in Kabera Maido or Busia, on maize grain, how are you helping them that this agreement makes sense to that person down there?
I think the best way we can do this is actually bring back the cooperatives and grow the cooperative movement. Because if you see countries which have got that kind of framework, I may have 1 acre of land, half an acre of land, because of the fragmented systems. But if in a given area we can all do, say, fruits and vegetables, but and we share the extension services like the fertilizers, the tractors, you know, and it keeps the costs down. Then we can have common post-harvest handling facilities. We can have common cold houses. We can have common storage. We can actually have the receipt system. Even if we want to borrow, we can actually have a loan from our grain or whatever we have harvested. Then the phytosanitary, all the decontamination technologies. Me, myself alone, I wouldn't be able to do the radiation facilities because they are very costly, the ones that decontaminate fruits and vegetables. But collectively, if we can own that. So those are the frameworks like cooperatives. And then they come in and increase volume, standardize the quality, and then we can package that produce for a specific export market. And then, of course, the free zones come in. But those free zones, like special economic zones, they come in and specifically give you cost advantages like exemptions or tax credits, especially where you're producing for foreign markets. So when you have all these collective things, you can be able, at a person in Bundivujo, I can be able to benefit because my cooperative is negotiating for me the price, my cooperative is negotiating for me the right fertilizers, we are using the right extension services, we have social services, the education, we have schools, we have hospitals, you know, in those local areas. If we develop this cooperative movement, I think that would be the best. And people actually understand credit via now SACCOs, credit via, you know, those small units of and pockets of financial services. They really understand them. They also understand the cooperative banks because they were once relying on the cooperative banks. So our effort to revive it is one of those things that would actually help to boost production and then increase volumes where they are really needed, as well as the quality. So if we can solve those two things on the different value chains, especially the fruits and vegetables, and also scale up, I think we can do very well, even in a fragmented land system.
Thank you. The Honorable Minister mentioned especially France, Francophone countries, especially in West Africa. Honorable Mara, when you look at it and look at Central African Republic, a militia is there running, and recently I seeing how the president is guarded by the Wagner force there. It has happened all over West Africa. Should we be concerned, especially when we talk about neo-colonialism, that this uprooting could spread further, and these could be some of fringe benefits?
You know, I would then pick up, this is actually a pet subject of President Yoweri Museveni, when he normally talks about the strength of a state, building a state. And for example, he said in Uganda, why should Uganda have a foreign force? If you're really building a state where, you know, which is strong, everybody's involved, and it's a people-centered army, why would you need a foreign army? So what is happening in West Africa, even in Central Africa, is a failure of a state. Those are failed states, are the ones that will bring the Wagner troops to come. And I saw a president walking, and all around him were bazungus. Now, what kind of president are you? These are now the presidents who are exploiting their own countries, and now they're using a foreign force to keep in power. So I would want to be as frank as that. You cannot call yourself a country where your head of state is being guarded by a foreign force called Wagner from Russia. So that for me is my straight answer around it. And as African leaders, I think they should begin to, as we harmonize very many facets, and in fact, we are quite heterogeneous in terms of our politics, in terms of the level of maturity of our politics, inside of our economy, cultures, and every aspect of us are different. So we need to have certain common things about us. You know, we must have democracy, the rule of law, you know, having our economic policies centered around the development of our own people. And the PS talked about trade justice, and I want to get to it quickly. Timothy and viewers, if you want to understand these things very carefully, I talked about dollarization, and it's actually not only dollar, pound sterling, and euros. So what has happened is that Africa has been put as a vanguard for raw materials. You produce for us raw materials, whether it's gold, uranium, coffee, whatever, you give it to us raw, and then we'll give you a price. The price is controlled by us. So if you look at Uganda's national debt, is now about $20 billion. But our number one foreign currency earner now, let's pick coffee, gives us annually something around $900 million. So you have a debt which is dollarized in foreign currency, is about 20 billion. Now you have to, you have now to annually sell this coffee cheaply. Apart from focusing on your national economic development, you have now to pay that debt which you have incurred. And the guys are clever to make sure everything that you want, we are going to give you a debt. You go and borrow. But it is dollarized. It's not in shillings, it's in dollars. If it is shillings, we would print money and pay and manage the monetary policy accordingly. But it is in dollars. So you produce this coffee, whether it's 20 million bags, it will give you $1 billion, and you keep on being perpetually in debt. What now we want is to say, bring the technology home. As President said, we have great soil, good soils here. We can grow all manners of crops. Now we can add value. So instead of you giving us $2 per kilo of our coffee, we want you to give us $40. Yes. And Audrey Rabogo in Serbia was saying, instead of $40, I'm only looking for 20. You give me $20 on my kilo of what? A kilo of coffee. You see the lift, the same amount. So your raw materials, you've transformed, added value to it, you have multiplied it 20 times. Or in Europe, 40 times. And that is what they don't want. Because that is now trade justice, which you've talked about. Yes. So if you can pay me that value, then I am going to quickly deal with this debt of yours, which you've given me. It will not take me another 50 years to pay your debt. I'll take it, it gives me 2 years. Yes. And I've cleared your 20 billion. I'm a free man. Then I can industrialize.
And create jobs for,
my people. So that is where the heartbeat is. Yes. And that is why President Museveni was very clear to Putin and said, my brother, if you can take this as a policy, bring us the technology, we can produce everything. And in Tesco's in UK, they are selling, you know, they have, anybody who has been to Europe, you eat a banana, it's not a banana. It smells like a banana, it's plastic.
It's plastic food.
You try pineapples, terrible. They're all terrible fruits. Sour. Yes, so now, but we have all these fruits here. We need the technology here, and we sun dry our pineapples, our bananas, and we take it to Tesco's in UK. What is going to earn us here 5,000 shillings, in UK it will earn us 30 pounds. Now, consequently, when we do that, we have added value to all our agricultural produce, and we have built a technology here. And then we are now trading, not fairly, to trade justice.
Yes.
I don't want to miss that word of yours. Trade justice. Now that's what you call trade justice. The technology is home, and we will quickly move forward as a country. And as President Museveni said, we will now have a chance to now buy more of your things you are producing. And now we are now going to, it's fair, it's beneficial to both of us. So I think in terms of the strategy going forward, and I think the Western democracies also need to look at this thing. This is not about us moving towards Russia and whatever. They need to begin to look at their own foreign policy in Africa. If your foreign policy is so much around promoting other values which we don't appreciate, and then you say, if you don't do this, I'll hang it over your necks. I think African values must be respected. We must work as partners, and when you are giving us resources, you should do it in such a way that it promotes justice in terms of trade. Now, like for example, they can only say, like in Europe, you can only bring coffee beans tax-free if you are bringing just the green beans. But if you are going to bring processed coffee, VAT would be hammered at 17%.
Yes.
So the price will go over the roof, and you can't compete with somebody who has brought his from Brazil. Let me tell you, Russia and Ukraine controls 30% of the global wheat trade production. A total of 700, the total wheat production in the world is 760 million tons. But Ukraine and Russia, two of them, they control 30%. And that's why when that war started, the prices of wheat went up, skyrocketed. So some of the African states, like Egypt, Sudan, you know, in Sudan, it caused change of government, just bread.
Yeah.
Bread. So
same is happening in Kenya.
Yes, bread, ugali in Kenya.
Is an issue.
So now the biggest producers of wheat in the world is India and China. But those population, as I told you, is over 1 billion in terms of population. So they are not going to sell their wheat. They are going to consume it inside. Now it is only Russia and Ukraine that had the bigger production that are now supplying the world with the excess wheat. And Geraldine has mentioned and said, Africa in terms of the land size and arable land is the biggest in the world. So what the African leaders should be asking is, why should we be going, for example, to Russia and Ukraine for wheat? For wheat, we can produce it here. What is it that is lacking that we cannot produce our own food? I was pleased when President Museveni said, in Uganda we have our own food. And indeed, in our villages there, if we can take intensive agriculture and do it well, everybody will have food.
There was a report which was indicating that Africa spends more money on importing food compared to what we have in the African Development Bank.
Exactly. So why do we do that? So Timothy, in summary, we need a new rethink. I think even as a country, as Ugandans, we need to just sit down, minister, you represent the government, me and my brother here, parliament. I think we just need to say, what is it that can take Uganda forward? There should be that robust thinking and put a framework and we implement.
Thank you.
Maybe before we, that goes, with the win. Last year we had I think 2021, with the Dubai Expo.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And Uganda took part very actively in that. This year we have this summit. And we're having a lot of these very important events.
Yes.
The question is going to be how Uganda takes advantage of these events and, pursues.
We have a coffee summit next week.
I am saying this because I know that much as we are talking about these opportunities and all that with Russia, there are countries that have been actively, engaging Russia and benefiting. A country like Nigeria, Algeria, Egypt, Kenya, just near here, Tanzania, South Africa. These are countries that have been very active.
Yes.
And so the question is going to be, what about Uganda? From this, how do we pursue aggressively and begin to, you know, position ourselves? And because if you have Kenya here taking advantage, what about Uganda? So as the president is trying to aggressively open doors and all that, I think we need to keep the momentum, but do what is required to make sure every opportunity is not lost. As the doors are opened, you don't wait until they get closed. You keep them opened, and you know. Yeah.
Staying with you, Honorable Ojara, before I come to Professor, some might suggest the human rights record, especially for Russia, might be a blind eye for African countries. What do you think about this, and could it be something that is a deterrent in this relationship?
Well, it's important to acknowledge that every country has got their internal issues. Even in the US, when you go to the United States, there are a lot of issues.
Blacks are dying every day.
There are issues of, you know, blacks are, you know, you hear this, you read this. Yes. Some people are targeted and killed. There are a lot of, so when you go, even in the UK, you go to, so there is no country that can claim that they don't have these things. Two, when you look at the situation between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine are not the first countries to go to war. Many countries have had their different experiences. And so I think the West tries to look at, and again, it's also about how we define democracy. Some people are saying, you know, these African countries are getting attached to Russia because most of the leaders in Africa, you know, are autocratic. You know, these are dictators, and so it's about how people define democracy. There are countries, or there are parts of the world that would want to determine what democracy means and how each different country should conduct their internal issues. It doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about issues, you know, to do with human rights violations. Even in Uganda, there are issues we have all talked about, and so we have to continue talking about them. But that should not stop us from talking about issues of trade and building relationship and having these foreign policies. I think we should be able to clearly define what we want to achieve while dealing with some of the things that we have to deal with.
Okay. Professor, something Honorable Ojara said, the Dubai Expo was there in 2021. We have had the US, Biden, before there was Obama who called us. There's China, there are all these expos, summits, and all these things. What is failing these things to translate that an ordinary Ugandan deep there can see some benefit out of these things? Because these are very good boardroom talks with
Yes.
the PAs. We can talk about them here on a show and feel good about them. But an ordinary Ugandan is wondering, when do I get answers to these questions?
Actually, maybe an ordinary Uganda, thank you, Timothy. An ordinary Uganda could be seeing it, but without making the connections. But first of all, I would want us to focus, which are these countries holding the expos? How are their economies organized? Who is in charge? You saw a Russian expo, the president was totally in charge of that economy, okay? Talking to his fellow heads of state and talking to all the, whether you're talking about bilateral and other kinds of talks. When you go to those other expos, the presidents are clearly in charge. What are they trying to communicate? That the economics is very central to the political project, okay? What did we do as African countries in the 80s? We were told, governments get out of development. Leave it to the private sector, manage the politics, and manage the security. And we really rolled back. Left it to the Stanbics, left it to everybody, and that's the time when everyone was arguing that's about basic fundamentals. Now, you have economies going one way. Of course, you have the state struggling to provide services and those central things. The private sector-led development has also not really picked up. It is just very extractive and things go back home to their country. So why haven't these things occurred? First of all, I think they are occurring in the kind of investments you see with well-meaning private investors going below and trying to, of course, they recruit a few people and who pay taxes and then who also do a trickle down when you care about your relatives. Now, but that is not enough. What you need is to have the state in charge of the economy, giving direction of where it wants to be. When you go to these countries, they are still state-run factories, they are state-run industries, and even if they allow a private sector, but they also have theirs competing alongside. Ours were demonized for being white elephants. They were sold off at pennies. And now we are wondering what happened to the cooperative movement. It was there. We just need to remind ourselves of the history of this country. The cooperative movement was there, and things worked, as the Honorable PS is saying. You had railway lines going to the last point where they needed something.
The last mile.
The last mile, whether it was copper, whether it was, I don't know what, the other factory for coffee, cotton, all these things went to Lint Marketing Board and wherever they were. Those lines were not laid randomly. There was a clear direction of the economy. Okay, first of all, stretching from colonialism, but it was then sustained. We were told, forget about those. Now you find there's a slipper here they have been stolen, and here they are there, and it's going to cost this country a lot to revive some of those things. So I think we have a lot to do. And like we've all sung in infrastructure, we've all sung industry, and infrastructure is not just the technology, but also the service infrastructure, the systems need to be put in place so that actually the people benefit. And you can see, of course, PDM trying to go to the last mile, but of course we are yet to see the benefits of that. But all these things are going to come up. And another thing that can be done, I know the West seems to have the biggest amount of money. But I also know there were studies which were done in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they showed there's a lot of trade between African countries, but it's not that big type of trade. It is these people on pickups crossing borders. On that time, it used to be the Mawingo buses and all those kinds. So if we tracked, there is that kind of thing taking place, which we can leverage, which we can grow. There are other trading blocks which are coming up. She talked about AFTA, we call it ACTA or AFTA, whatever it is. But so we can have this infrastructure so as to leverage. Right now, the people you're having, the countries you're having there are Kenya and Rwanda, okay? Because they have enough things to do local content and whatever it is. But if we get the right infrastructure, develop our economies, we can diversify the trading blocks we are in. And then all of this will come back in terms of jobs, in terms of more taxation, in terms of services, and you'll see things changing for the common person on the ground. But as of now, with our kind of demographics, someone asked me about the population dynamics, where you have 67% of your population aged 15 years and below. And they, of course, they're not going to die because you've given them immunization. They're all going to grow. 40,000 people graduating per year from all the numerous universities.
And they'll grow with a lot of energy.
Yes, and the jobs are not growing at the same rate. So you actually need a miracle to run this country. And that's why you need to respect those who are running the country, because you need a miracle to run this country. But that miracle may not be sustainable. So let us go to wherever we have friends, negotiate these things with our interests clearly articulated and very clear, and see, at least if every year we can offload 500 people into the gainful sector, it will work. Let us also make peasants reproductive. But I think these things are not ending in the boardroom. I have faith in the people who are going there. They mean well. And just one last thing, I know we've talked a lot about dollarization, but the other thing why these Francophone countries are having the trouble they are having is the CFA. The CFA system is even worse than the dollarization, where they have to keep 50% of their reserves in France. So how do you develop like that? So they have all these resources, but they're among the poorest countries, and you're going to see many coup d'etats. And today, what did the French president say about Niger? Anyone interfering with French interests in Niger, they're going to come in.
And what did the West
And
Africans
you're talking about
say?
neocolonialism? So what a better way of illustrating neocolonialism. What are French interests in Niger? French interests should be in France. Niger's issues should be Niger's issues. But anyway, that's where we are.
Also, Mali, Burkina Faso have threatened that once anyone attacks,
they're all safer countries. I think they're protecting themselves.
But gentlemen and ladies, we're going to leave it at that for today. I want to thank Professor Sarah for coming through. Honorable Jara, thank you very much. Honorable Mara, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Permanent Secretary, Madame Gerard Sali, it's very good to have you. Honorable Chris, it's good to have you here, and thank you very much. Next week, we're going to make sure that we have a cake here, so you have to be present.
So we have to come back.
Hey, we have to come back and cut
the cake here. Okay.
Also, Honorable Chris, thank you very much.
We have what we call a government assurance. So that's an assurance.
I also want to congratulate you on bringing the Mbps of internet from $70 to $35, which is a very good thing. Means a lot of business is going to be moving in that direction.
But we hope that will be translated into reality.
Absolutely.
We'll leave it to him there. But we're going to end today with this quote by Simon Sinek, which says, "Dream big, start small, but at all costs, start." God bless you. Have a good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
In fulfillment of the Constitution obligation, which mandates the state to make reasonable provision for the welfare and maintenance of the aged, the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development is implementing the Social Assistance Programme for Empowerment, SAGE, designed to provide income security and reduce poverty among older persons. Over 300,000 older persons in 146 districts in Uganda have benefited from the grants. The income security has made life better for eligible older persons aged 80 years and above, registered with the National Identification Registration Authority, NIRA.
Aliwo akasente akakola kuida babita kuchini ku radio radio yatukobera yamatiza najo kutaya kubawo ali mwekandise akasente kasoka nkafuna nagwa munguchi enkoko edaba dukulu bange erufu yokabiri tuyafuna erufu yokubiri nata munguchi akabizi ngangulya ki Chiegulia ngulia ibadukulu bange ndikole government enambi mubuke uno empe kuyichi akasente nganimwe mugushi ekyokulya ekyabadukulu bange tikati ebintu byenfuna okuyambibwa mbe nsaba government obusente bwetugwa butono bungi nga nkusaba ebe etugemeku etwongezeku tikati nze n'ebizibu nga ebyobulwaire omuntu amaiso gasiwulira omugongo guluma